Hello and welcome to Part 2, Other Sources and Case Studies for the lecture series on attack advertising. So I want to start out this little extension on the Jamieson et al. Reading with a bit of a reference to other sources that discuss attack advertising. So first from Gadi Wolfsfeld, who talks about making sense of media and politics. Wolfsfeld tells us that attack ads are helpful, and really all political advertising is helpful because it's a citizen resource. We can learn from almost anything. So while there may be other sources that are more appropriate or less biased to learn from, we still do gain something as a society from the kind of information that's present in political advertising. We learn about the candidates, we learn what issues they identify themselves with, we learn a little bit about where they stand on policies, although sometimes we should learn a lot more. And sometimes we see information about the legislation that candidates propose to enact. Of course, advertising can exaggerate things or give us somewhat inaccurate information, so it is better for us to have multiple sources in addition to political ads. Something else to note about advertising is that it is really the realm of the wealthy or those who are supported well financially. So Mara Einstein, who writes a book about advertising, tells us that it is always going to be the realm of the elite, high-ranking political offices, so long as advertising carries the amount of importance that it carries. Because people with money can buy their ways into the real estate in our heads. As an example, back in 2018, J.B. Pritzker, who was running as the Democratic candidate for Illinois governor, outspent Bruce Rauner by more than, $6 million. And Pritzker did win that election. Now, it's not just money that explains why one candidate wins and another loses, but money does prevent some people from being able to enter into these conversations at all. We can also think about political campaign advertising as a rhetorical strategy, and this is quite consistent with most of what Marty Medhurst said in Presidential Rhetoric on the Campaign Trail, the reading from March 13th. So politicians often take an ambiguous stand on issues if they are known to be partisan and divisive. So probably in campaign advertising, we're not going to see someone trying in the general election to talk about abortion at all, because that's something that's known to divide the country quite thoroughly. Point 2 here, campaign messages can inflate the relative importance of issues. This is agenda setting. Medhurst talks about this. Part 3, character construction. So political candidates use political advertising and other media artifacts to create or alter perceptions of their character. So they'll use these texts in order to promote a particular identity for themselves, usually one that's quite flattering, obviously. Campaign messages also have an effect on the public because depending on how the audience feels about the message, they may align with their political party more strongly, or they may diverge from their political party. Hey, tumble. And here we move into the case studies, and I hope that you'll excuse some of the awkward formatting that's about to come up here. So when we look at specific examples of political ads, we need to consider what kind of ad is it. Is it an advocacy ad that's giving us one-sided positive feedback about one candidate? Is it a comparison ad or contrast ad that's giving us two politicians and their diverging opinions about things? Or is it an attack ad that's a one-sided critique of the opponent of the person whose campaign super PAC is paying for the ad? Is there policy content in the ad? So is it useful information for voters? And then 3, is the ad seemingly credible? Do we think it's more or less trustworthy? Does this seem to be vetted by appropriate sources? So I want to show you briefly the most famous and arguably most successful attack ads of all time. And this one is interesting. It came from the year 1964 when sitting president incumbent Lyndon B. Johnson was running against Barry Goldwater. Barry Goldwater very famously made some remarks that led people to believe that he would be willing to engage in some sort of nuclear activity if it were necessary to do so to counter extremism. And LBJ ran his campaign against Goldwater after that debate presentation by suggesting that Goldwater was trigger happy and would potentially kill everyone. So the daisy spot. Hey. So the daisy spot is considered to be the way that LBJ really constructed Goldwater's character as a person who would potentially cause nuclear annihilation, and here that is.
These are the stakes to make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark. We must either love each other or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd. The stakes are too high for you to stay home.
So if we consider the Daisy ad in terms of the advertising analysis rules that Jameson and co-authors give us, we know that what kind of ad is it? It's an attack ad, although it's an interesting one because it doesn't actually use Barry Goldwater's name at all. It just strongly implies that if you vote for Barry Goldwater, you will destroy the entire planet. So that's a pretty vicious attack. In terms of policy content, no, there really isn't very much. There's again just the hint based on cultural context in 1964 that one candidate is willing to use nuclear force and the other one isn't. So there's a little bit of an implicit comparison there, but it's not really present in the ad. Is the ad seemingly credible? Well, no. I mean, it's very emotional. And yet, in spite of all of these shortcomings, it was still considered a very effective ad. Okay, moving on to a clearer example of what I'm labeling an advocacy ad. This one does have a little bit of comparison between Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders, and this is focusing on the Democratic primaries, so trying to decide which person representing the Democratic Party could enter the general election. So there's some interesting cues in here about negative ads, in fact, and also characterizing Bernie Sanders and Sanders' campaign as false and liars without saying so explicitly. So there's a little bit of comparison in here, but mostly it's favorable towards Joe Biden.
Super Tuesday. State after state after state called for Joe Biden. Bernie Sanders goes on the attack. PolitiFact has called the Sanders campaign's attacks false. Joe Biden has always been a strong supporter of Social Security. Biden will increase Social Security benefits and protect it for generations to come. Negative ads will only help Donald Trump. It's time we bring our party together.
I'm Joe Biden, and I approve this message.
Okay, so let's think about this in terms of advertising analysis. What kind of ad is it? Primarily advocacy, but I think an argument could be made that it's a comparison ad because of the way that Bernie Sanders appears in it. Is there policy content in this ad? Yes, there's a little bit of policy content in this ad. Mostly it's 3 screens that talk about Joe Biden being a strong supporter of Social Security, enhancing Social Security benefits, and so on. We also have the comparison that Joe Biden doesn't use negative ads, and the implication is that Bernie Sanders does, but they don't come right out and say it, and so this is something else to be aware of with this kind of advertising. A lot of it is implication and innuendo, and sometimes people do avoid overtly critiquing their close competitors. Is the ad seemingly credible? It is formatted professionally, and the critique of Bernie Sanders includes a citation for, I think Forbes it was, or Politico. However, the quotation is the word false, So it's edited in such a way that we can't really tell based on context if it's an appropriate criticism. This takes me to my final ad that I'm going to show you as an example, and this is a clear-cut case of attack ad. And this is an attack ad run by Bruce Rauner's campaign against J.B. Pritzker, and this is in the 2018 gubernatorial race for Illinois governor between Rauner and Pritzker. Rauner lost. Pritzker spent more than twice as much as Rauner did. Rauner was the incumbent. So here's an example of an attack ad.
Take it from us. J.B. Pritzker. He's a puppet. Yeah, Mike Madigan's puppet. For decades, Madigan kept property taxes high and made a fortune helping cronies like Pritzker dodge them.
Now, Madigan and Pritzker want to raise your income taxes even more.
We can't afford that.
They know. Higher taxes for you, more corruption for them.
J.B. Pritzker. The guy's no dummy.
But he is Mike Madigan's puppet.
Returning once again to advertising analysis to consider the Rauner attack ad on Pritzker, what kind of ad is it? It's a clear attack ad. We have a lot of one-sided criticism of J.B. Pritzker. We don't hear very much at all about Bruce Rauner, so it's an attack ad, plain and simple. Is there policy content in this ad? Your income taxes will increase. That's the policy content. That's it. Non-policy content has to do with character construction of J.B. Pritzker, stating that he's corrupt and he's somebody's puppet. Is the ad seemingly credible? I don't think it is as credible as it could be because it's Muppets slinging insults. Nevertheless, I think this is the kind of thing that would have been very satisfying for Rauner supporters to see, and a lot of these attack ads are memorable because they use very unconventional styles to get their points across. So that's it. Those are the case studies and other sources for this week's discussion on attack advertising.